over the last 10 years, I think the biggest changes, the biggest victories, have been at the Supreme Court. Not only the abolition of the juvenile death penalty, but the limitations that have been placed on the use of life without parole for individuals who've been convicted of crimes as juveniles. Fortunately, those decisions don't affect a whole lot of people. And what I would like to see over the next 10 years is to have the essential logic behind those decisions, which is that developmental science explains how adolescents are fundamentally different from adults in ways that warrant their differential treatment under the law. I'd like to see that logic applied to the more day-to-day kinds of offenses that get kids in contact with the justice system, because it's one thing and a terrific thing to abolish the juvenile death penalty, but there are many children and adolescents in this country who penetrate into the juvenile justice system in ways that are harmful to their development, harmful to their long-term chances as adult members of society, because they're being treated not as juveniles, but as adults. So to me, that would be the most important legacy of our work, is to see that general orientation applied to a whole range of justice issues and not just to the most serious of crimes. All of us who have been parents of teenagers know that adolescence is a time when people make mistakes. And not a single person in this room would think that the way to respond to their child's mistakes is the way in which the justice system responds to children's mistakes who have the ill fortune of coming into contact with that system. So the main recommendation that Bob Schwartz, who wrote the companion piece, and I want to stress is that we really need to stop as many kids from having contact with the justice system as possible, and to stop those who have contact with the system from penetrating any more deeply into it than is necessary for purposes of community safety. As I'm sure most of you know, only a very small percentage of juvenile offenders, even those who commit very serious crimes, go on to become adult criminals, something around 10%. And when a youngster comes into contact with the justice system, it is almost invariably a negative experience in terms of that person's trajectory into adulthood. It's disruptive of education, it's disruptive of labor force participation, it carries great risks for mental health, and increases the chances of further criminal activity. We need to figure out a way to both identify that 90% who are not going to pose long-term risk to the community, and to respond to their bad behavior in ways that doesn't derail their lives. So the number one, I think, priority is to find alternatives to formal processing, alternatives to institutionalization of first-time offenders when they come into contact with the justice system. The second important priority has to do with what we do when youngsters who have been in the system are coming out of the system. Because right now they are woefully prepared to re-enter their communities in ways that are going to get them back on a pathway into successful adulthood. There are some communities that, if you can imagine, actually prohibit them from going back to regular schools, insisting on isolating them and segregating them in schools in which the only other young people they come into contact with are those who've been in the juvenile justice system. That clearly has got to stop. So we need much better reentry programming for young people coming out of the justice system so that they can get their lives back in order and become successful participants of our civil society.